Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, many of you, our viewers and listeners, are struggling to manage their own finances, let alone understand what's going on in the larger world of economics and geopolitics. So it's our great pleasure today to have someone on who can make sense of this. Having read some of his published articles and his books, I can confidently say that John Tamny is an expert in macroeconomics at least, and probably in more things. And so it's our great pleasure to have him on. And so, John, thank you for being our special guest here today.
Hey, Leighton, thanks so much for having me on. I'm flattered and appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about your books and your many brilliant articles. But before we do that, as we always do on this show, we're going to start with some framing aphorisms. And these are going to be somewhat familiar to you, John, because they're from people you talk about in your books and in your articles. The first is Ray Dalio, who said, if you're not aggressive, you're not going to make money. And if you're not defensive, you're not going to keep money. Secondly, from a noted economist who, in my opinion, might be the most brilliant public intellectual alive today, Dr. Thomas Sowell, who said, it is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Um, he has a way with words, and from his someone who is one of his mentors, Milton Friedman, who wrote, many people want the government to protect the consumer. But he says a much more urgent problem is to protect the consumer from the government. And finally, from another economic sage, Mr. John Tamny, who said, capitalism cannot cause a financial crisis because capitalism is about markets constantly correcting errors. It is government intervention that can often and does cause crises. So who do we have in the show today? Well, John Tamny, he's president of the Parkview Institute. We're going to talk to him about that. He's editor of RealClearMarkets, and he's a senior fellow at the Market Institute, and he's a senior economic advisor to Applied Finance Advisors. He's also the author of 8 books, and released in July, his most recent book, last July, I should say, The Deficit Delusion, Why Everything Left, Right, and Supply Side Tell You About that the national debt is wrong. And his previous books include Bringing Adam Smith into the American Home, A Case Against Home Ownership, and The Money Confusion. So, John, I want to ask you about some of your articles because I've noticed that a lot of times you say things that go against the grain of what most people are saying about what's going on in terms of economics, and which I find really fascinating. But before we get into that, I want to ask you about this thing that's going on over in Davos, and President Trump gave a speech that's getting a lot of attention. And you may or may not know this, but the Canadian government, our federal government, is thoroughly steeped in Trump delusion syndrome, and is talking about cozying up to China, talking about a new world order. And Dr. Murray Sabrin, who was a guest on our show last year, really had a pleasure sitting down with him. He said this, and I wanted to get your take. He said Donald Trump's Davos speech was less a vision for global prosperity than a familiar exercise in grievance, self-congratulation, and ideological contradiction. He says, speaking to an audience of global business and political leaders, Trump framed himself as the singular defender of economic success while simultaneously advancing a worldview that depends heavily on state power, political favoritism, and centralized control. What do you think about what Dr. Sabrin says, and also in general what's going on at Davos in Trump's speech? I'm interested to get your take.
Well, I think Sabrin gets it broadly right. If you're looking for consistency in Trump's commentary, keep looking because you won't get it. But my response always to people is that, well, that's why he's president, and that's why you're not.
Yeah,
This isn't me defending the rhetoric, but people say, yeah, couldn't Trump have handled Rob Reiner's murder better? Couldn't he have
yeah,
handled John McCain better? Couldn't he have handled Prime Minister Carney better? No, because see, if he handled them the right way, he would never have run for president and he would not be president. It's that he is so different that caused him to do this in the first place. And so, love him or hate him, Trump is who he is.
Mhm.
And so to try to fix him is to presume that in fixing him that he'd still be president, but the fact that he's unfixable is why he's in the White House.
Yeah. And, I think, you really make a great point that a lot of people seem to be unprepared for the things that he's prepared to say and do. But I mean, you can't deny his popularity. I want to come back to Trump later in the context of some of the articles you've written about his economic policies, but I want to start with talking about the Parkview Institute. I read that it's a nonprofit organization funded in July of 2023. It's obviously something that is very important to the work that you're doing. Tell us about the Parkview Institute and why you were involved in founding it and what exactly it does.
Well, I had been at Freedom Works at the time, which is, it closed a year later, after I left, but I didn't leave Freedom Works. I kept my office there. I just started up my own, and my thinking was I had started to worry that my ability to make a market liberal case might be hemmed in by Freedom Works and some of the groups out there.
Hmm.
I believe that our borders should be open to immigration. I believe that we should have open and active relations with China, particularly economically, because that's not just good for every American, but it's also the best foreign policy I've ever heard of to have free trade. And so these ideas historically were more welcome on the American right. They're not as welcome nowadays. And so Parkview was my way of ensuring that I could continue making a classical liberal case for the economy, but it's also my way of making what I want to be an optimistic case for the economy. I
Hmm.
believe that the free market right has won the global battle and that we won going away from the other side.
Hmm.
Um, my aim is to make an optimistic case daily about not improving on what's great, but on making what's great spectacular. And
Hmm.
it's hard to now. There's a lot of negativity out there. People are welcome to be negative. I just view it as, wow, the debate is so much better than it was in the 1970s. We've clearly won. Let's just improve on our victories.
Hmm. Well, you've written a book about Adam Smith. You obviously took a very deep dive into that. I've done a less, let's say, in-depth study of Adam Smith, but I want to ask you about that. Clearly, you're, I guess, like, let's say, a classical thinker in terms of economic theory. You describe that as sort of liberal, as a small L liberal approach to things. But Adam Smith, in his writings, he sort of presumed a fundamental morality in economic theory and economic transactions. And, he calls this, on the one hand, the invisible hand, which I think when he was saying that, he was referring to, to God and to some sort of, transcendented supernatural idea that was guiding human affairs. And you would know, but most people wouldn't, that Adam Smith was actually more proud of his tract on morality than he was of the wealth of nations. So my question is this is, looking at the way things are happening now in terms of economic transactions, to talk about things like free trade and so on, do you think that Adam Smith would be shocked by what he's seeing today in terms of there seems to be sort of a lack of that fundamental morality that sort of grounded his economic theory? Or would you disagree with that?
Um, I always remind people that Adam Smith didn't invent capitalism. He was reporting on it.
Right.
He
Yeah.
it's so instructive that he opens the book with the pen factory. One man working alone could maybe produce one pen per day, but
Yeah.
7 or 8 men working together could produce tens of thousands. Smith, I mean, the book is still brilliant. It's so relevant to this very day and will always be. He just was pointing out how things work.
Hmm.
My sense is that he wouldn't be so much surprised that politics is happening, because politics always happens. What I think would surprise him the most and it's what people talk about the least in his books, is that Smith was brilliant on money. He knew that money was just money circulated as though by an invisible hand more than anything. Where there's production, there's money. Where there isn't production, there's no money. And I think that Smith would be flabbergasted that the dollar is one value one day, the Canadian dollar is one value that one day, not another day. He would say, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
Because he was very clear the sole use of money is to circulate consumable goods. And it was a
Mhm.
throwaway line to him. It wasn't it was just, okay, it exists. Money is the quiet thing so that the wealth that we create, we can use this measure to move wealth around. It would stagger Smith that economists decided that no, 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 money should be loud and let's have it float around all different prices on a day. He'd say, "Have you guys lost your mind? Do you realize all the production you're losing, all the information you're not creating because you've made money the subject matter?" So I do believe that would surprise him the most, but it's a great question.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you on this concept of money, and I guess in a broader sense, the economy. You wrote a piece about in Forbes about how credit is produced by lenders and borrowers. And this I found this a very interesting piece in that I honestly I'd never really read anything that connected sort of how credit is produced and why. And I think it's really important because so many people are suffering under household debt. Canadians, for example, you might know this, have the worst ratio of consumer debt to GDP in the world. And so this is a really serious problem, not only for Canadians, but also for Americans, um, and even people in China, all over the world. And so I wonder if you could maybe describe what you were getting at in that particular piece, because I found it really fascinating.
Well, the first thing I would say, you're saying Canada, China, and the US, three very
Yeah.
rich countries, or, some of the richest. No surprise the people would have lots of debt. When you're productive, you produce credit, as in you become lendable
Hmm.
because your future earnings are viewed as credible enough for you to borrow. And that was the main point of it, is that there's such a focus on central banks and interest rates and what will this central banker do? Oh my gosh, have people lost their minds? Credit is produced. Why do we borrow money? We don't borrow money. We borrow what money can be exchanged for. So we borrow access to trucks, tractors,
Right.
computers, desks, chairs, most important of all, labor. And so credit is produced. The more production there is in the world, the more credit there is, at which point, never forget that would-be lenders are producers of credit too.
Hmm.
By revealing an ability to earn in the present, but much more importantly, revealing an expected ability to earn in the future, people produce the credit, as in,
Hmm.
you can't borrow just because. You can borrow because you've revealed to the marketplace an ability to pay monies borrowed back, or an ability to
Yeah.
give your investors a return on their investment. And
Hmm.
so it's really produced by both lender and borrower,
Hmm.
without productivity, so it begins, it's all with production. Production is the source of credit, nothing else.
I really appreciate that explanation, and that's the part that I hadn't heard before. And so much of what we hear about, in public parlance, even from economists, is that debt is somehow a bad and corrupting thing. And what you're kind of saying, correct me if this is wrong, is that actually we should look at debt and credit as not something that's negative or positive, but as neutral. It's simply part of the economic process. And it's something that, if it's used wisely and productively, it can actually generate wealth. Is that kind of on the right track of what you're saying?
Absolutely. Is Russia, does it have a better economic future than the United States? because it's only got 300 billion in debt. And this isn't me defending government borrowing
Right.
in the US, but we've
Yeah.
got 38
Yeah.
trillion. I'm sorry, that is the market saying that the US's economic future isn't bright, but just bright, but it's blindingly bright. And it's also the
Yeah.
market saying that Russia doesn't have much of an economic future at all. No one would
Mhm.
lend to it.
Wow.
And so individuals and businesses are no different. Um, when you're a startup, you can't borrow anything. You have to give up equity if you want to get money.
Mhm.
But once you're an established business, you can borrow with ease, or you
Yeah.
can much more readily borrow. And so why we have demonized debt, and I think a lot of it has to do with most people think about debt, but they've never loaned it, and they have no sense of what
Mm.
goes on. They write as though banks are in the business of playing keep away. We've
Yeah.
got this money. We don't want anyone to have it. No, no, no. Banks need to lend the money. That's why they rent the money, and that's why they pay interest on deposits. They need to get that money loaned out.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so they're reliant on producers out there producing credit, as in being more productive so that they can be loaned money,
Mhm.
so that they can be invested in.
This is really interesting because I find that I read a lot of economic stuff, including yours, and I find that a lot of it sort of comes from almost a scarcity mindset. And actually, when you look at people like Adam Smith, it's the opposite. He talked about an abundancy. There's always more. We can create more, and the economic tools that we have are actually designed to produce more. And getting back to your earlier comment about Trump. I think because he speaks in these terms of abundancy, of the future is so bright we've got to wear shades. That seems to frighten people, because they're used to hearing about this scarcity mindset. Would you agree with that take? And how do we sort of change people's minds about this?
I would agree with it to the extent that I think that's what pundits believe, but I think
Yeah,
the average person thinks that way, that, yeah, our ability to produce is unlimited.
yeah,
And I think that's the problem with economics today. Well, GDP went up 2.3%. Oh, who cares about that? It's not even a worthwhile measure in the first place. Talk about what happens when people produce together. When we introduce
mm,
not fewer workers into the workplace, but more. We introduce
yeah,
more machines into the workplace. Again, Adam Smith began Wealth of Nations with the pin factory for a reason. He was just
yeah,
saying that work divided is the greatest concept in the world, because
hmm,
it quite literally signals endless abundance. We are
hmm,
only
hmm,
limited by John Stuart Mill was clear about this the same way, that we're only limited by the ability of people, of hands and machines to work together. And so you think
hmm,
of AI. I mean, Adam Smith was talking about a pin factory and people working together and producing more and more. AI is about the stacking of brains.
right,
It's about tessellating brains.
hmm,
Oh
hmm,
my gosh, what I'd give to be a baby born 100 years from now. Think
yeah,
about what this bodes for the future, that we're not just combining effort, but thought. Oh,
hmm.
wow, what a beautiful world it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, and that example you talk about Adam Smith's pen, I've seen a video of Milton Friedman doing the same thing with a pencil. He's describing, how the different parts of the pencil come from different parts of the world, and it's only through the working of the market economy that you can produce that pencil that people write with. One of the examples of you talking about how economists get things wrong was a recent piece you wrote again in Forbes, entitled "Economists Missed on Trump's Tariffs Because They Missed on Inflation." Want to explain what you mean about that and sort of elucidate what that piece is all about?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, it gets once again back to the pin factory. I hate to be so repetitive,
No, that's great.
but
We're hitting on
again, what
something.
was Adam Smith saying
Yeah,
is that one man working alone can't produce much at all, but lots of men
yeah,
working together in specialized fashion can produce enormous amounts.
yeah.
And so think about what happened in 2020. Suddenly, not just US politicians, but global politicians were clear, you cannot open your factory. If you open it, we will cut off electricity. We are shutting down the global economy and demanding that people stay at home so that they don't infect each other with the virus. Well, is it any wonder that prices are higher today? It took decades of trial and error to get to this interconnected global economy where, again, pencils were effective of all sorts of activity around the world. And then extrapolate that to a Boeing airplane that's literally 6 million different parts from around the world. And
Mhm.
suddenly you shut down the global economy to varying degrees. The cost of production is quite logically going to soar after that because you can't just turn that back on.
Mhm. Mhm.
Workers will scatter, they'll find new work, they'll find something else, they'll quit, they'll retire, who knows?
Mhm.
But you can't just restart that, and so prices were naturally higher, not because of supply-demand balances. By definition, those mirror each other, but because we broke what was so intricately put together.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
prices rose, but a rising price that's an effect of command and control by governments, that's not inflation. That's just command and control, and a rising price by definition signals a lower price somewhere else. If you're spending more on an iPhone, you're gonna have less to spend on other things, and so that's not inflation. Inflation's a shrinkage of the monetary measure, nothing else.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yet
And
economists said, "Well, prices are higher, this is inflation." That's exactly what the global political class wanted them to say. They wanted them to blame someone, "Oh, the Fed did this." No,
right.
no, 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 no. Politicians panicked, and we still have higher prices as a result.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
not inflation. Inflation is a shrinkage of the unit. We must be clear and strict about what things are, because if we're not, we're going to call green blue. Well, in economics, if you call it green what's blue, you're going to cause a lot of misinformation, a lot of
Yeah.
misunderstanding, and that's what we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting because, again, as I said off the top of the show, a lot of the things that you write about and say go against the grain of what, most economists are saying, but actually it makes a lot of sense. And sort of, in this vein, I wanted to get your take on something that, is sort of being said by economists publicly. And again, coming back to what's happening over in Davos, and more particularly sort of the how the geopolitical and economic policy of the Trump administration is impacting, economies both in North America and around the world. And the theory goes like this: that with Trump talking about Greenland and going to the World Economic Forum and saying, "Look, globalism is dead, and we're not, green scam and all of that." There seems to be this rift between Europe and the United States. Some of the EU is threatening, to end economic relations with America, and Trump is saying, "Yeah, so what?" But some sort of economic theorists are saying that this is having a downward pressure on the U.S. dollar, and that this is now impacting things like gold prices, commodities prices, that they're moving up because people are losing confidence in the U.S. dollar. Is this a lot of the kind of hokum and speculation that you're talking about that doesn't really have any basis in reality, or are they getting
Yes.
close to the mark?
Yes. Not, and this isn't to defend the direction of the dollar.
Yeah.
Uh, w just what I would say is Donald Trump sadly wants a weak dollar, and presidents get the dollar they want.
Ah.
Uh,
Does he
they
want that
always
weak dollar for trade purposes? Is that why?
that is what's assumed, but it doesn't whatever it is, yeah, I think Trump thinks he's incorrect that if you devalue the dollar, that creates prosperity because we can export more, but
Right.
the only reason to export is to import, and so a weak dollar is impoverishing, and it doesn't help exports because let's never forget, as we discussed with the pencil, it's a creation of global cooperation. So there's a lot of imported inputs with anything we produce in the United States. If we're breaking the dollar, those imports cost a lot more.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we're not making ourselves more competitive. And then let's say what drives down prices? Two
Mhm.
things: investment And what is investment but just a desire to enhance the number of machines and hands around the world going into the creation of a market good? The
Hmm.
only thing that brings down prices then is investment and in globalization. There's
Hmm.
nothing
Hmm.
else. I mean, there's just the fact that the world is so interconnected explains why a poor person can dress better than a rich person long ago. Just
Right.
everything's mass produced.
Hmm.
And so you don't enhance that by breaking the dollar, which is the world's currency.
Hmm.
And let's never forget that when investors invest, they're buying returns in dollars. Well, why put money to work if the currency that you're putting to work is in decline? Better just to
Right.
consume it.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so the dollar was weakening long before Davos. It's been weakening for quite some time because that's sadly what Trump wants.
Mm.
And it's
Interesting.
really quite unfortunate. But if you look throughout history, FDR wanted a weak dollar. He decreed it so and got it. Nixon
Yeah.
wanted a weak dollar. He got it. Ronald Reagan ran on returning to the gold standard. The dollar's
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too, because there's a lot of speculation from gold and silver stackers that this is part of or setting up a possible currency reset and bringing the US dollar back to a gold standard or perhaps tied to some form of cryptocurrency. What do you think about that?
well, that's one of the things that excites me about cryptocurrencies, and this isn't it's not me being excited about Bitcoin, because I don't think Bitcoin's money, but, what did the China was the first country back in the 7th or 8th century to issue a fiat money, paper money, and the Confucians at the time said, "Well, we would rather a private issuer of the paper money than government because the private issuer wouldn't devalue."
Interesting. Hmm.
Governments have always devalued, and I think to some degree, crypto is a market response to that.
Hmm.
Uh, Eventually, someone's going to issue a widely circulated cryptocurrency that holds its value, that's flat, that doesn't move at all. Would you rather earn that or a Canadian dollar or a US dollar or a euro? I know I would.
Yeah, I think
And
most people would.
yeah, I think yeah, because people just they don't wanna lose wealth by just having it. They don't want their money to decline in value, and so
Right.
I feel like crypto is going to force the hands of governments to either stabilize their currencies or get out of it altogether, and so
Mm.
it has me optimistic over the long term. I'll add one other thing to that. What does capitalism do best but erase profit margins?
Mm.
There's 10 trillion on a daily basis in currency trading. What is that a signal of? For one, it's a signal that markets hate floating money. Because see, there were no currency markets before 1971. Why would you trade money that was tethered together? The dollar was defined as 1/35th of a gold ounce.
Right.
The rest
Right.
of the
Okay.
world's currencies were tied to the dollar, including the Russian ruble. They did it implicitly, but they did it. They were pegged to the dollar.
Right. Hmm.
Since then, currency markets have proliferated because no one trusts money anymore. And so that's the
Mm.
markets telling us we want the old way.
Okay.
After which, what does capitalism do? It eviscerates profit. Anywhere there's a profit margin, capitalism solves that. And so it strikes me that eventually, maybe it's a JP Morgan dollar, maybe it's a Canadian national dollar, maybe it's an Amazon dollar, is going to
Hmm.
replace what is so unstable with stability. And in doing so, currency markets are dead at that point.
Mm. Interesting. Wow. Great, fascinating take. I want to talk to you about another piece that you wrote recently for the Parkview Institute. This is about America's greatest companies. Tell us the kids are all right. And it starts off saying you don't want to send your son there because he'll become a communist. He'll become a drug addict. And that's I have a son who's in college at ASU. And so this you say this seems to be the modern consensus about elite colleges and universities. So why pay for modern education? And you say, except that the quote that begins this piece is from the 1960s. That was a shocker. And it was telling another parent to not do something. So I'm interested in, as a father who has a kid in college and another one who's going soon, I want to get your take on this because I found this piece really interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, these kids today and what they're teaching these kids today is as old as college. William F. Buckley wrote God and Man at Yale at the early 1950s.
Yes, yeah,
The great David Lodge wrote Changing Places about Cal Berkeley in the 1960s. John LaRue wrote The Handmaid of Desire about liberal education at Stanford in the 1990s. Colleges have always been left wing. I mean,
yeah,
if you wanna create a big business, you don't become a college professor, you go create a big business, and so they've always been
yeah,
this way, but kids turn out just fine. They go there,
yeah.
they have their fun. They probably don't go to class very much, and if they do, they're not really listening. And so I'm merely making the point that everyone's saying, "Oh gosh, the elite US schools, they're so bad, they're teaching communism and socialism." Well, supposedly they always have, but kids come out and they get jobs and they
Yeah.
get married and they need to support a family. So they make a lot of money. And it's just notable that the best US companies recruit from a very small number of elite schools that the consensus is, at least on the American right, well, they're all socialists and everything. Well, all we know is that the kids who graduate from them aren't socialists. They're probably going to Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale to get a job, as they always
Right.
have,
Mhm.
and they're not socialist. And so I'm just saying, guys, calm down. Americans are always looking for a crisis. Everything is a crisis to Americans. And it strikes me that it gives the impression to the world that Americans are just a bunch of spoiled brats. They've got it so good that they've got to find some reason to complain. And I'm tired of it. And so I wrote what I wrote.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it, and, speaking of complaining and being spoiled brats and looking for crises, Canadians are no different, and recently, Mr. Carney, our most recent prime minister, has been over in China, and, he's been almost, thumbing his nose at and antagonizing President Trump. Went over to China and is trying to create new trade deals. He's trying to, even though Canada has about 80% of our trade with the United States, he's trying to, and only about 3% with China. He's trying to create all these new trade deals with China, and of course, this has been very invective in Canada. People are frightened by China. China's had interference in our last 4 federal elections, for example. But you've rewritten a couple of pieces on China that were sort of refreshing. And one of them was, if Xi Jinping is all powerful, then why do we fear China? I'm interested to get your take on China. I think it would really resonate, especially with Canadians who are very fearful of our country, or at least our leadership, trying to get us deeper into bed with China in terms of economic relations. I'm interested to maybe if you could talk about this piece. And there's another one also that you wrote on China that I read and I found really interesting is, if we don't want the Chinese to lap us, let them sell to us.
Mhm.
So I'm interested to get your take on this on China because you seem to be bullish on trade with China,
Absolutely.
but many people that frightens them, and so I'm interested to hear about why you're bullish on trade with China and why we shouldn't be afraid of Xi Jinping or trading with the Chinese.
Well, let's start with the second one. If we don't want the Chinese to lap us, let them sell to us. Again, that's Adam Smith once again. When you can divide up work with other people, you're the winner because you get to specialize. And so, if the Chinese are good at drones, let them sell us drones. Then we can focus on the things that we're good at. There's nothing changes. Uh, California would never shut off trade with Arizona or Tennessee or Texas. It would be impoverishing, and it's similarly impoverishing to shut off the Chinese from producing for us. What they can do for us frees us to do what we do best. Nothing new there, I don't think. Uh, the next thing, people say, well, but China subsidizes its industries and Xi Jinping directs its industries. Well, wait, so are you saying that China's edge is communism because the government supports a lot of businesses? Because That's communism, and we know that doesn't work. So what we have to conclude is that China is prosperous, perhaps despite Xi Jinping, not because of it, because communism
Right.
doesn't suddenly become something that works because it's happening in China. China
Hmm.
used to be communist. We know this because it used to be incredibly poor.
Yeah.
It's less and less communist, and that's why it's rich. And so from there, I say, well, look at what's happening in China right now. They're having a massive love affair with all things American. There are 5,500 McDonald's in there, but McDonald's wants to have 10,000 within the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Look up how many Starbucks are in China. On a weekly basis, it goes up by hundreds and hundreds of Starbucks.
Hmm.
Nike sells more shoes in China than any other country but the US. Elon Musk sells more cars in China than he does in the US. It's a huge market for everything American. The people love us over there.
Hmm.
And oh, by the way, they're able to buy lots of American stuff because we buy lots of Chinese stuff.
Right.
And has anyone ever asked, do people tend to shoot bombs, missiles, and guns at their best customer? Well, they don't. And so if you're afraid of China, which I don't know why anyone would be afraid of China, but if you're afraid, better to be trading with them than to be blocking their goods because uh, in that case, war with us would be frightfully cheap. But if they're trading with us, war would be very expensive for them and
Hmm.
us. Maybe
Yeah.
that means we won't go to war.
Yeah. This is maybe another example, John, of where what is in the popular media, it stokes irrational fear, and people don't really get the true facts of what's going on, and we get this sort of coloring over of the economic reality that maybe is more important, because maybe we don't like China's politics, or we don't like the way they treat the Uyghurs, or we
Mhm.
don't like what they do to Christians. Oh, by the way, talking about how they love all things American, um, Christianity has exploded in China. I just wrote a piece
Oh,
for
yeah.
my show that showed that Christianity has exploded from 1 million Christians estimated in the year 2000 to 160 million today in a quarter century. You make a really really great point about, we fear maybe what we don't know, we don't understand. But I think what you're saying is when you actually look at the granular facts on the ground and also the bigger picture, fear might be the real enemy, and not the Chinese. What
Absolutely.
is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I'm forever reminded of, they said this about the Soviet Union too. Oh, the Russians, they're propaganda, they hate us. Gosh, the day we opened McDonald's in Russia, 30,000 people showed up.
Yeah.
And Russian men, they had nothing under communism. Once they had a taste of freedom, they were taking their dates to Pizza Huts. It was viewed, this is Americana. And I get and they venerate it in Africa to this day. A fun night for the people is to go to McDonald's for the evening. And I'm so
Right.
proud of that. And it's so beautiful. And so when
Mhm.
we put up barriers to countries and the people in those countries who want to be like us, I'm sickened by it. It's
Yeah.
not just anti-economic growth, it's anti-America. These people like us, they wanna emulate us, and we're calling them thieves and crooks, and, sure,
Yeah.
government does bad things in China. Government does bad things everywhere. You want to engage with these people, and I've always felt that if of anyone in the United Donald Trump loves tall buildings. He should
Yeah.
go to Shanghai, and first of all, he'd see that everywhere you look is an Apple store, a Nike store, a Microsoft store, McDonald's, Dairy Queen, you name it, it's there. Tim Hortons, all the Canadian chains, everything is in China.
Yeah.
But also everywhere you look is a shimmering tall building. I mean, it would knock Trump over. Shanghai makes New York City look poor by comparison. And
Mhm.
he would love it, and he would say, "These people, they're emulating us. They wanna be like us. Embrace it."
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. A lot of what you say, is consistent with what I read in Ray Dalio's books. As you know, he has spent a lot of time in China and developed deep relationships there, and also developed a real understanding of the way the Chinese think and do business. And a lot of what you say really resonates or is consistent with what he says. But this question of politics or politicians, government meddling in the economy brings up another point I wanted to ask you about. Donald Trump is saying that he's gonna or they're gonna pass some law that's gonna prevent institutional investors from buying houses. This is the new villain. This is why housing is unaffordable. But I read a piece that you wrote which said that institutional investors are actually the answer to the housing question. So I wanted to hear from you about this and why you think institutional investors might be the solution to this affordable housing question, which is one that is really at the top of the ledger in places like the United States and Canada, where millennials and Gen Xers are really having trouble being able to afford buying a home these days.
Yep. Well, let's ask the question, what does Wall Street reward? What do investors reward? They reward businesses that make things cheaper.
Right.
Walmart, Apple put a supercomputer in our pocket. Uh,
Mm.
Google makes search costless. Meta makes communication around the world costless. Wall Street rewards low prices. And so why would housing be any different? Institutional investors are buying housing to make it more abundant, to make it better, to make it more attractive. Let them get in. Think back to 30 years ago, 20 years ago. People used to get their phone bills and they'd go line by line to see where the call was made because long distance used to be expensive. Now long distance is not even a factor. We're just on the phone. I'm literally talking to you on TV. You're in Canada. I'm in the United States. What's it costing us?
Yeah. Isn't it great?
It's brilliant. And so what do we know? That when investors put their wealth to work, it's always with an eye toward making what is expensive cheap.
Mhm.
Housing would
Mhm.
be no different. And they
Yeah.
would make it possible because I think people, they say, well, housing's unaffordable. No, housing's unaffordable in the places we want to live. I guarantee you, the home prices in Nova Scotia are quite a bit cheaper than they are in Toronto. I'm just
Yeah.
guessing, but I think that's
This is
probably
true.
true.
It is
Um,
true.
and the difference between Rosedale and Toronto versus some other neighborhood would be quite notable also.
Right. Mhm.
That's the beauty of Wall Street going in is they'll probably buy up houses in some of the best areas and make it possible for people to rent in areas that they could never own in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you rent, you don't have any extra expenses. That's your expense. You buy a house, your expenses begin with a mortgage. It's just up, 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 up from there. And so
Mhm.
I believe that the signal of expensive housing isn't a call for more supply. It's telling people, don't buy a house in the first place. It's a lousy investment. And don't
Mhm.
tell me
Mhm.
about how your house went up in value over time. What could you have done in the stock market during that time without any of the headaches of owning a house, without any
Right.
of the costs associated with owning a house? And so I think as is often the case, Adam Smith kept saying housing's not investment. Don't view it in that way. We need a lot more Adam Smith in the housing discussion than we presently have.
Yeah, and a lot less government. And this, from listening to you and also from what I've read, um, your economic theory is pretty consistent. That is that we need less government control, less government meddling in the economy. They tend to muck things up and try to do quick fixes, which have long term consequences that they don't really understand. And that if you leave market forces alone, that's going to produce the best possible results. Is that a fair way of describing, or am I sort of
Oh, yeah.
oversimplifying
I
what your
mean,
message is?
it's almost a cliche, it's so obvious, but, I always say to people, well, they say, "Well, government spending increases the economy." Oh, really? Well, how? Government spending is just the government substituting itself in the allocation of resources for the marketplace.
Right.
But see, and so the meddling is always the crisis. And
Yeah.
so Americans say, well, look at how rich we are, yet we've got a massive government. Yeah, and my answer is, yeah, a rich country can have a massive government. But just think how much richer we would be if there hadn't been decades and trillions worth of spending over the decades. Think of the cancer cures that we never got to try. Think of the
Yeah.
transportation advances that we're still awaiting. Think of the technological advances that would make this miracle whereby you and I talk to each other, watching each other from two different countries is happening. Eventually, they'll say this is primitive, and they
Right.
will because we'll eventually get to the point of investing in more advances, but we would
Right.
already be there if government weren't such a size consumer of precious wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, brilliant. I want to ask you one more thing before we turn to our reading list and talk about a couple of your books that you've written. Um, there's a man named Rob Smallbone. I was sent a piece where he theorizes that this commodity shortage, he talks about a commodities boom, but that it goes way beyond gold and silver. Of course, gold and silver are really appreciating in value right now. But he explains why structural supply constraints are forming across silver, copper, and the materials that underpin the global economy. And his theory is that beneath the surface, a growing number of strategically important commodities are facing structural imbalances, and this is really key to the broader economy. Do you agree with that, or disagree, and why?
Oh, if I knew exactly, I'd be a trillionaire, but I tend to think that much of this isn't about a shortage of gold or silver, it's about a weak dollar. Um,
Okay, that's the
it
culprit. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I look back to the 1970s. To this day, there's this myth that the Arab oil embargo caused oil prices to rise in the United States. Well, it didn't. Uh,
Mm,
the Arabs didn't stop selling oil to us. They just stopped selling oil directly to us. They still sold to us. They weren't going to give up the biggest market in the world. And so they
yeah.
sold to others their oil, who subsequently sold it to us. And it's kind of like
Mm,
China's rare earths. Oh my gosh, China won't sell them to us. Oh, yes, it will. It's going
yeah.
to rare earths are going to get here because we're a massive market and Canada's a massive market, and they're
Mhm.
never going to give up a massive market.
Yeah.
And so it strikes me that we have no problem of supply. And if we do, markets will solve that. What we have a problem of is a dollar that it bounces around in value. And it's really shrunken right now, and it's reflected in the price of gold and silver. Let's never forget that gold wasn't used as money for millennia because it's unstable, but precisely because it's constant. It's
Right.
it
Yeah.
We didn't just decide one day, "Oh, let's do gold." Gold was the market's answer to currency
Yeah.
instability.
It's inflation
Cigarettes,
neutral, isn't it?
seashells,
Right?
and teeth didn't
Yeah.
work very well, but
Yeah.
gold worked exceedingly well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so gold's not up, the dollar's down, and so that's a
Ah.
signal to the US Treasury, "Get serious." At what point will the rest of the world make the right complaint about the US that you guys are just irresponsible? You have the world's currency, maintain it as a stable measure of value. That's
Mm,
what you owe to yourself and, by extension, the world.
interesting. Wow. Well, let's talk about a couple of your books. You've written 8 of them in all. The most recent one you published was released last summer. It's called The Deficit Delusion: Why Everything Left, Right, and Supply Side Tells You About the National Debt Is Wrong. And you talked about this a little bit, but what was it that attracted you to this topic for your most recent book?
Well, because left, right, supply side libertarian, they keep making the debt about, well, we're not taking in enough tax revenue, hence we have the debt. So it's always, oh, we need to bring in more tax revenue to bring down the debt. And I've just heard that argument for years. And I thought that this is the most mindless thing I've ever heard. So you
But almost
want to
everybody
get,
believes this, John.
oh, they
Almost
all believe it.
everybody buys this.
Yeah, they all say the same thing. It doesn't matter about
Yeah.
ideology. Wait, you think if you give politicians more money, they'll be more responsible with it and bring down the debt? And so I'm merely making the point that that on its face is laughable.
Mhm.
But then ask yourself the question, who can borrow? Can you borrow more at 21 than 41? Well, generally not, because at 41, you've established an ability to earn money. lenders see the upward trajectory.
Right.
That's certainly true of businesses.
Mhm.
Um, Uber couldn't borrow anything in 2011. In 2026, it can borrow billions. And why
Mhm.
can it? Because the markets see it as having a robust future. Well,
Yeah.
governments are
Yeah.
no different. The more tax revenue they're expected to take in, the more they can borrow. And so I'm making the point that we have a problem of overtaxation, the rich in particular, and how we know it is all the debt. If the rich weren't so overtaxed, if they weren't expected to be to shower the government with exponentially greater revenues in the future, we wouldn't have all this debt. And so we
Right.
have a problem of
Mhm.
too much revenue, but all people can look at is the symptoms of too much revenue, which is debt. Well, if you keep focusing on the symptoms, you'll never solve the problem, which is too much tax revenue to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And now your previous book that you wrote in 2022 is almost like a prequel to the most recent one. It's called Money Confusion: How Illiteracy About Currencies and Inflation Sets the Stage for the Crypto Revolution. And I actually read this book about 2 years ago. That's how I learned about you.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm grateful that I did, because I was able to get you on the show and have this conversation with you. But this book almost sets up your most recent one, doesn't it? Because it talks about this confusion about money, how people really don't understand. You use the illiteracy about currencies that you've talked about today. But you want to talk about this book a little bit, because I found that I did not know anything about crypto before I read this book, and I came away at least having a rudimentary understanding about what crypto is all about. And of course, you said something here that you say in the book is that you don't regard Bitcoin as as real money. But could you explain, what's the money confusion all about, and why did you write that book?
The money confusion is all about that money's supposed to be some sort of asset. No, money's just a measure.
Yeah,
And money's
yeah,
everywhere there's production, and it's nowhere where there isn't production.
hmm,
You can't just increase so-called money supply. And so I say in the book, if you're focused on so-called money supply, you're already confused.
hmm,
No matter
yeah,
what, money is an effect of production. And so if governments did nothing, there would still be money. If the US Treasury renounced the dollar today, said it's no longer anything, the US would be full of money by tomorrow. And why? Because there's lots of production in the US, and the sole purpose of production is to exchange it. And what's the sole purpose of money? It's to exchange product. It's to facilitate the exchange of production. That was Adam Smith's point. And so I'm making the point that forget about money supply and all the Fed and all this. The markets, just as they're efficient with production, they're efficient about where money is. And this is what Adam Smith was saying all along. He said, a locale where there's no production will not have money in it for long. And conversely, a locale where there's lots of production, by definition, will have lots of money. It is the invisible hand par excellence.
hmm, yeah,
Money is not the instigator of wealth creation, it's the effect. Yet most
hmm,
economists will talk about, well, you've got to increase so-called money supply this much
yeah,
to get this much economic growth. That is so
yeah,
backwards. That is so central planning.
yeah.
No, people just need a trusted measure and they'll do the rest.
Mhm. That's a deep insight what you just gave there, and, I think it's important for people to realize that. Folks, we've been spending the last hour or so with economist and author John Tamny. We've talked about 2 of his books, The Deficit Delusion and The Money Confusion. He's written several more, and, apart from Amazon, John, where can people find out more about you, read more of your stuff? Obviously, there's the websites that we've talked about, but where can people find your books and your writings?
Yeah, well, the books are largely Amazon is the only game in town increasingly with regard to books. So they're all on Amazon. Everyone should buy lots of copies of them. But yeah, I'm editor of Real Clear Markets, and so I usually put out at least one column every day, at least
Yeah, you're
one.
prolific. You write a lot of
Yeah.
stuff, and it's all
Well, it's
good, so
kinda
bravo.
like, if you're an athlete, you should exercise you should practice all the time. I feel like if I'm not writing, why am I a writer? So,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is how I develop ideas. I've got to be out there writing. Um, and so, yeah, Real Clear Markets. You can find me on Twitter and places like that.
Mhm.
Uh, but I'd like to think I'm offering an optimistic take on the economy, but also one that chips away at the myriad fallacies that stalk economics that come from both sides. The free market side, I would argue, is almost as bad as the interventionist side. Both
Yeah.
sides believe a lot of nonsense, and I'm trying to correct that.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job. And it's been our great pleasure to have you here and have this discussion and to introduce you to our audience. Folks, John Tamny, author, economist, and really, really interesting guy. I've really enjoyed our conversation, John. Want to thank you so much for being our special guest here today on Gray Matter. And I hope that you'll continue to write prolifically. And I'm looking forward to reading more of your books. I've got the money confusion. I'm going to read the Deficit Delusion now and hopefully make my way through a few more. But I want to thank you so much for being our special guest here today. It's been our pleasure sitting down with you and finding out more about you and your writing.
Well, thank you so much, Leighton. I'm flattered. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to offer a different point of view. And my views are different. And so I really appreciate that you're patiently willing to ask me questions and let me say things that probably a lot of people don't say. So thank you.
All right, thank you.